was facing the ground. He have a cut on his tank strap, so the tank it was floating. His camera video, it was underneath him on his chest.
April 28, 2000. Tourists watched as a young diver, Yuri Lipsky, slipped beneath the waters of Egypt's infamous Blue Hole. Minutes later, his camera recorded a descent that would become one of diving's most haunting videos. These are 5 divers who captured their final moments on camera.
The incredible moment a diver finds a GoPro camera at the bottom of a lake. Incredibly, the card inside the camera wasn't destroyed, and he was able to recover several videos. He soon learned the images were the final moments of a young man lost far too soon.
June 2017, for the family of Richard Ragland, a 22-year-old National Guard member full of life and adventure, it was the day everything changed, a moment they could never have prepared for. Richard was the kind of guy who lived life at full speed, ziplining through forests, dancing in parking lots, and recording it all on his GoPro. He had a way of turning strangers into friends, and every day was an excuse to make a new memory. But at Foster Falls State Park in Tennessee, what began as just another adventure ended in heartbreak.
He's having a great time, not a care in the world.
We live in life. We live in life.
Sadly, the day was to end in tragedy.
Richard had been swimming beneath the powerful waterfall with friends just days before his 23rd birthday. He was a strong swimmer, but the force of the falls is no match for anyone who underestimates its strength. That day, Richard went under and never came back up. His friends, his family, and the entire community were left with a hole that nothing could fill. The only tiny comfort was the knowledge that Richard, always with his GoPro in hand, had likely recorded his final adventures. But when investigators sent Richard's family what was supposed to be a drive with videos taken of Richard by someone else, they found the envelope empty. Someone had stolen the contents, leaving his parents, Robin and Gary McCreer, desperate and empty-handed. For 2 years, they wondered what Richard's last moments looked like, how he spent his final day, what he saw, and whether he was happy. Then, 2 years later, an unexpected phone call changed everything. Treasure hunter and YouTuber Rich Abernathy, who goes by Rich Aloha, had been diving in the same waters where Richard lost his life. Park rangers told him about the tragedy and mentioned that if he found a GoPro down there, it would probably belong to the missing young man from 2017. Rich found the GoPro covered in muck but miraculously intact. Even more incredibly, the SD card inside not only survived 2 years underwater, but it still worked. What Rich saw on the recovered footage confirmed what he'd been told. This wasn't just another lost camera. It was a message in a bottle, carried through time for 2 years at the bottom of a lake. Tracking down Richard's family wasn't simple. It took hours of research and dozens of phone calls, but eventually, Rich found a number for Gary McCreer. The text message started like any other.
Aloha, my name is Rich.
But that name was more than a coincidence. 2 Richards, connected across time and tragedy, now had their stories intertwined. The McCreers met Rich at a Panera Bread in Atlanta, where he showed them snippets of the footage. Robin described it as an
out-of-body experience.
Watching her son's final moments, knowing exactly how the story would end. She cried herself to sleep that night but woke up with a smile, feeling like she'd spent another day with her son.
It was unbelievable to hear, something of that magnitude. We didn't think that we would ever see it again.
The recovered footage showed Richard being Richard, full of energy, laughing with friends, living life to the absolute fullest. There was no fear in him, even as the day's adventures drew to a close. His mother said she may never be able to watch the final seconds, but it was enough to remember Richard exactly as he lived, fearless, joyful, and always ready for the next adventure. Rich, who built his YouTube channel around returning lost treasures, describes this find as the most impactful of his career. For him, it wasn't just about recovering lost property. It was about returning pieces of a life lived with purpose and passion. He said,
"It means so much that I could bring something totally invaluable and priceless to them."
For the McCreers, this unexpected closure is both a blessing and a burden. They miss Richard dearly, But the recovered footage offers a new way to keep his memory alive. Even in death, Richard Ragland's spirit continues to touch the world, reminding everyone who hears his story that life is meant to be lived fully, fearlessly, and with the people who matter most. Richard's story is powerful, but the next case shows how even the most ordinary day can turn into heartbreak, all because of a single decision. May 2, 2025, on Indonesia's Kakaban Island, a 30-year-old scuba diver, Jang Shohan, prepared for what should have been a routine dive. Jang, an experienced diver with professional instructor certification, joined 12 tourists and 3 guides from Green Nirvana Resort for a tour of the region's famous jellyfish lake and coral reefs. The group began their dive, descending nearly 30 meters into the blue. For half an hour, they explored the vibrant marine life that makes Kakaban so famous. Everything went smoothly, until Jang's final ascent. Just 5 meters below the surface, her GoPro slipped from her hands and sank into the depths. The guides immediately warned her not to attempt a solo rescue, but Jang, perhaps underestimating the dangers even as a professional, defied their instructions. She plunged back into the water alone, determined to retrieve her camera. Time passed. The guides and other divers waited, scanning the surface and scanning the blue depths. But Jang didn't reappear. Panic took over. The guides organized a frantic search, diving again and again. But no matter how hard they tried, the ocean refused to give her back. Rescue teams from the local Marine Search Agency and Indonesian soldiers joined the effort. Days passed. The search expanded across Kakaban's dive routes. Finally, on the next day, a body was discovered 88 meters below the surface. The recovery team pulled Jang's body from the deep. The strong currents and depth had kept her trapped. Medical examiners confirmed the obvious. She had drowned, likely overwhelmed by the powerful undercurrents that sweep Kakaban's waters. The GoPro she risked everything for remained lost. News of Jang's death spread quickly, and Chinese social media was soon filled with grief and outrage. Many highlighted that she was a certified dive master, a reminder that even seasoned professionals can misjudge the force of the ocean. One post read, "It is usually the case that more professional divers tend to underestimate the power of nature." Jang's family in Zhejiang, China, received the devastating news. Their loss echoed across the diving community. Experienced divers worldwide stress the importance of never diving alone, no matter how skilled you are. As one user posted, "No camera or footage is as important as your life, but the water's unforgiving nature doesn't end here." The next case is about friendship, sacrifice, and the dangers that come with both. February 6, 2014, 5 Finnish cave divers stood on the frozen edge of Norway's Plura cave system, the deepest known sump in northern Europe. Their plan was straightforward: navigate the treacherous underwater passage connecting Plura and Steinuglaflaget caves, a route only explored once before. They prepared meticulously, knowing the dangers, but nothing would prepare them for what awaited beneath the ice. The lead pair, Patrick Grönqvist and Jari Huotarinen, entered first. Patrick, a seasoned firefighter, and Jari, a production manager, had dived together many times before. That day, as they cut through the ice and slipped beneath the frigid water, their spirits were high. The plan was to traverse the cave, film the journey, and emerge on the other side, a challenging yet manageable 5-hour dive. But cave diving doesn't always respect even the best-laid plans. Their journey began through a wide flooded tunnel, opening into a long air chamber. Here, tradition held that divers would pause and admire the ancient rock formations before plunging into the darkness below. The 2 men continued, descending deeper into an almost vertical shaft. The temperature dropped to a bone-chilling 2 degrees C. As they pushed on, their dry suits barely holding back the cold. At around 110 meters deep, just beyond the cave's deepest point, the passage narrowed sharply. Patrick realized that Jari was no longer behind him. He turned back, his heart pounding, and found his friend trapped in the restriction. Jari's torch signaled distress. He was stuck, unable to move forward or backward. At those depths, panic is fatal. The body's response to cold and pressure makes every breath a risk. Patrick tried to help, removing some of Shari's entangled equipment, but his friend began to panic, switching repeatedly between his rebreather and bailout cylinder. Then, in a moment Patrick would never forget, Shari swallowed water. Despite desperate efforts, he drowned before his friend's eyes. Patrick tried for almost 20 minutes to free the body, but the restriction was merciless. He managed to calm himself briefly, knowing that becoming agitated would only speed up carbon dioxide poisoning, a risk at such depths. He had to make a terrible decision. His diving computer showed he'd spent too long at depth. Surfacing too quickly could mean decompression sickness, known as the bends, or even worse. With a heavy heart, he left his friend behind and began the long ascent, taking over 6 hours to decompress. Back on the surface, the remaining 3 divers, Vesa Rantanen, Kai Kenkinen, and Jari Uusimaki, waited for their turn. They had no idea what horrors awaited them in the darkness below. Rantanen led the next group. As his team moved through the narrowing passage, he heard Shari's rebreather beeping ahead, a warning signal. Then, in the dim torchlight, he saw the body. He faced an instant decision: attempt the long, uncertain return, or try to squeeze past. He chose to go forward, removing his gear and pushing it through the gap before himself. It took 15 agonizing minutes to pass the body, minutes that felt like a lifetime. But he did it and eventually made it out to the surface. Behind him, Uusimaki couldn't handle the shock. He panicked and lost control, drowning in the same stretch of cave. Kankanen, realizing what had happened, made the difficult decision to turn back and attempt the long return to Plura's entrance. His journey became a nightmare, an 11-hour solo ordeal with failing equipment and dropping temperatures. He broke through a fresh layer of ice to finally reach the surface, his body and mind pushed to their absolute limits. All 3 survivors suffered decompression sickness and were quickly hospitalized. The Norwegian authorities closed the cave, declaring it too dangerous to attempt a recovery. British cave diving experts confirmed the risk. Hari's body blocked access from the Steinugelflaget side, and approaching from Plura was deemed too hazardous. But for the Finnish divers, leaving their friends behind was unthinkable. Grönqvist promised Jari Hotarinen's widow that he would bring them home. Quietly, they began to plan a secret recovery mission. The code among cave divers is simple:
never leave a friend behind.
6 weeks later, under the cover of secrecy, a team of 27 arrived in Plurdalen Valley. Support divers staged equipment, and the original team prepared for the perilous descent. Grönqvist and veteran diver Sami Pakarinen led the recovery. They knew they had only 15 minutes at depth to free the bodies before the risk of carbon dioxide poisoning became critical. The operation was tense and dangerous. The first day, they managed to free Huotarinen's body and bring it to Steinugelflaget. The next day, while recovering Uusimaki, a section of the cave roof collapsed on Pakarinen. He barely escaped with his life, but eventually, the second body was recovered as well. The team called the families first, then quietly informed the authorities. The Norwegian police chose not to press charges for the illegal operation. In Finland, their effort was hailed as heroic. Grönqvist received the Order of the White Rose of Finland for his courage. But the survivors remain humble about their actions. They know the dangers of cave diving and admit that perhaps not everyone should have attempted that final dive. Their experience serves as both a warning and a tribute to the unbreakable bonds formed in the depths. Today, the Plura caves are open once more, but the tragedy lingers, a powerful reminder of the risks hidden in the unknown. For those who still dare the depths, the code remains unchanged.
Never leave a friend behind.
The next diver lived by that same code, honoring it even for strangers. But tragically, it cost him his life.
Earlier this year, an Australian diver made headlines round the world when he lost his life in a remote cave in South Africa.
January 2005, Dave Shaw, a 50-year-old Australian technical diver and airline pilot, made headlines worldwide when he lost his life during an extraordinary recovery mission in Bushman's Hole, South Africa, a cave known for swallowing those who challenged its depths. Shaw's final dive was not a reckless last-minute decision. He was an experienced diver and Cathay Pacific pilot, known for his meticulous planning and calculated risks. But it was his discovery of Dion Dreyer's body at 270 meters, a South African man lost in the abyss 10 years prior, that set this tragic story in motion. Shaw felt compelled to retrieve Dion's remains, not just for the record books, but for Dion's parents, Theo and Marie, who had waited too long for their son's return.
Okay, now Dave's going to move over to the entrance of the cave. And see how clear the water is already.
The initial conditions were perfect, clear water and good visibility, but everyone present knew what was at stake. You see, Bushman's Hole is no ordinary dive site. Located on Mount Carmel Game Farm, its narrow entrance leads to a vast chamber, over 927 feet deep. Only 2 divers before Shaw had reached these depths. One was Nuno Gomez, who set a world record at 927 feet but turned for the surface immediately. Shaw, however, was not content with records alone. He planned to connect a cave line, explore, and perform what no one else had dared: a successful body recovery at this depth. His custom-built Mk-15 5 rebreather, modified with a hammerhead controller filled with paraffin oil to withstand the immense pressure, had already proven itself in previous record-breaking dives, but nothing could fully prepare for the complications that awaited.
Things are not to plan because the body is loose. It's not in the... it's no longer stuck in the mud. Everything is loose. The body's moving around with its cylinders.
The plan hinged on a critical assumption: that Dion's body would remain negatively buoyant, anchored to the cave floor by the weight of his equipment after a decade underwater. But when Shaw began the recovery attempt, the body unexpectedly floated free. Years submerged had transformed Dion's remains into a soap-like substance that floats, turning the carefully laid plan into chaos. As Shaw struggled to secure the body, his physical effort increased because he was no longer fighting just depth and time, but an unpredictable element as well. And with every passing second, his breathing quickened, a deadly combination at such pressure.
Something seems to be stopping him now. He's caught in the line.
At a depth of 270 meters, even the smallest mistake can be fatal. Shaw's powerful lights, normally resting behind his neck, became tangled in the body bag lines, creating an inescapable trap. His camera captured the desperate struggle as he fought to break free, each movement draining his strength, each breath pulling him closer to the point of no return. Don Shirley, Shaw's close friend and support diver, descended in hope of rescue. But as he approached, his own hammerhead controller failed. He realized that joining Shaw would mean joining him for eternity. Shirley began his own battle for survival, eventually emerging from the cave after 12.5 grueling hours, alive but forever changed. It wasn't until 3 days later, during the recovery, that both bodies began to surface. The support team was able to recover them. They were entangled together in the lines that had sealed their fate together forever.
And he basically succumbed to all the pressures that you've got at that sort of time. And his breathing slowly faded and Dave passed away.
David Shaw's final dive was the 333rd of his career, a number that would become tragically symbolic. In just over 5 years of diving, he had accomplished what most could only dream of. But it was his final act of courage, attempting to bring closure to a grieving family, that defined his legacy. Don Shirley, heavy with emotion, later said, "Even now, I expect to turn around and say, 'Hey Dave, did you see that?' And of course he's not there." These words capture the depth of loss felt by everyone who knew David Shaw, not only as a remarkable diver, but as a beloved friend, husband, and father. Shaw's story showed the dangers of the deep, caught forever on film. Our next case takes us to another part of Africa, home to one of the world's most notorious dive sites. April 28, 2000, Sinai Peninsula. A 22-year-old diving instructor, Yuri Lipsky, prepared for a record-breaking descent into the infamous Blue Hole near Dahab, Egypt. His goal was clear: film himself beating his personal depth record in one of the world's most dangerous dive sites. The Blue Hole isn't just any underwater sinkhole. Its maximum depth exceeds 100 meters, with a notorious underwater tunnel called the Arch waiting at 55 meters. Divers call it the Divers Cemetery, a title earned by its estimated 130 to 200 fatalities in recent years. But Yuri wasn't aiming for the arch. His plan was a so-called bounce dive, a rapid descent and ascent designed to minimize decompression time. But he had only one tank of air and far too much weight strapped to his body. Before his fatal plunge, seasoned technical diver Tarek Omar encountered Yuri and tried to convince him of how dangerous his plan was. Omar later said, "He wanted to film the arch. I said, okay, so you'll need 2 weeks training with me first, and then we'll film." But Yuri, too eager and confident in his abilities as an instructor, declined the offer. He set off alone, camera mounted to his helmet, recording every moment. As Yuri descended, the sunlight faded. Around 4.5 minutes into his footage, daylight vanished entirely, and his depth was now estimated between 50 and 60 meters. At 5 minutes and 37 seconds, he flashed his dive computer to the camera. It was 81 meters. Moments later, it read 91.6 meters, the last clear indication before disaster struck. Technical divers know that below 40 meters, standard air becomes dangerous. The deeper you go, the more nitrogen builds up in your blood, causing nitrogen narcosis, an intoxicating effect that clouds judgment and coordination. At 100 meters, a diver breathes air 11 times faster than at the surface. Specialized gas mixtures and multiple tanks are mandatory. But Yuri had only a single tank of air. His video documents the exact moment his descent becomes uncontrolled. He tries to inflate his buoyancy compensator, but nothing happens. Panic sets in, and then in a desperate attempt to lighten himself, he drops the camera to the sandy bottom, hoping to regain positive buoyancy. The footage cuts, shifting to the camera lying motionless on the seafloor. Yuri's breathing then grows labored, and his dive computer begins to beep warnings. The next recorded images are from 5 days later, May 3rd, 2000, showing a recovery team inspecting the camera. By then, Yuri's body had been retrieved from 115 meters deep by Tarek Omar, the very man who'd tried to warn him. Miraculously, the camera survived. Its footage remains one of the most chilling records of a diver's final moments. Yuri's death became a grim lesson for the diving community. His fatal errors were clear: inadequate preparation, improper equipment, and disregard for established safety protocols. Technical divers now point to his case as a textbook example of why guidelines exist. And since that day, the Blue Hole's reputation as the world's deadliest dive site grew even darker.
It was a successful mission, and we got Yuri back to his mom and dad. But it was hard.
Omar, now known as the Bone Collector, has recovered more than 20 bodies from the Blue Hole. He says they want to get into deep water before they get into deep knowledge. The site is now heavily regulated. Unqualified divers are banned from diving there, and a policeman is always present to ensure safety procedures are followed.